Hello everybody, welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be talking about soil liquefaction and how I think it all ties into the phenomena we call the mud flood. Just looking at an official definition here, soil liquefaction, it occurs when a saturated or partially saturated soil by water substantially loses strength and stiffness in response to an applied stress like an earthquake or an explosion. And the material that is ordinarily a solid, it behaves like a liquid. Okay, so let's see if we can learn about these seismic waves. So really it's this seismic wave that is generated by earthquakes and explosions that vibrates the soil or sediment, and that's the cause of the liquefaction. So let's take a look here, and I believe it was in Canterbury, New Zealand, 2010 and 11 that they had a series of earthquakes. And just reading the highlighted portion here, during the Canterbury Earthquakes of 2010 and 11, liquefaction caused silt and fine sand. So liquefaction causes silt and fine sand to boil up and bury streets and gardens. So that's one effect, and it causes buildings and vehicles to sink. So it has this quicksand effect, and it also has the effect of bringing up soil and sediment from below ground level and depositing it. So those are two separate things that occur. And they're just saying here that liquefaction, it's usually associated with earthquakes of a magnitude of 6 or higher. I just wanted to point out here that let's see, liquefaction only happens when underlying waterlogged silts are present and when shaking is severe during an earthquake. Okay, yeah, so during 2010 and 2011 Canterbury earthquakes, over 400,000 tons of silt came to the surface, covering streets and gardens in several suburbs. So severe shaking in an earthquake, it puts pressure on the silt and water particles in these waterlogged layers, turning once firm sediment into a liquid. And then the pressure is increased by the ground above it, pushing down. Water fountains and sand boils can burst upward through any cracks. So you get this effect. I'd like to show you a little video. This is a type of material that this comes out of the ground in a liquid form, and then it solidifies back into in this case it's sand. But I'm just going to play this quick little video under fair use for educational and commentary purposes. So I think it's a minute long, but this person's going to show you how this sand got deposited in his garden or his backyard, and he goes about putting it in a wheelbarrow, and he exposes it to vibration, and you're going to see it turn back into somewhat of a liquid.
So this is the liquefaction at the back. Dug it out, so you can see across the rose bed all this sand has just come up out of the ground, and I've got a wheelbarrow full of it at the moment. It looks quite solid, so you'll see this re-liquefy as we go back out to the driveway, particularly as we drive across the cobbles on the driveway. Starting to get a bit of liquid back to it now. Here. onto the cobbles. And the shaking now will liquefy it. This is exactly what happens to the city. The buildings on top just turns to liquid. Then will stop moving. Solidifies or stabilizes fractionally. So this is why buildings are busy falling over.
Okay, look at that, eh? It just, when it vibrates, it loses its, it becomes a liquid. And then it just forms a solid again. So that is kind of interesting. So let's close a couple windows here. And again, this is another, just maybe a minute of this, and they're going to be talking about liquefaction here again.
In just moments, roads turn to quicksand, swallowing cars and swamping suburbs.
Oh, it was straight after the earthquake, mate. It was frightful.
And I just want to point it out. This is in someone's backyard, and all of this was pushed up to the surface. And it comes out as a liquid, and then it starts to solidify, and it just becomes sand or silt, whatever type of soil it happened to be.
Mate, it was frightful.
This process, called liquefaction, has left much of the city a soggy, crumbled mess.
But the liquefaction, I mean, the suburban streets are like rivers.
You'll see these ladies over here, they're just sinking.
The silty, saturated layers of soil just below Christchurch were so severely shaken, they liquefied. And with much of the city built on soft earth, seismologists believe the phenomena has heightened the devastation.
So, I mean, it is a nightmare. And most places aren't built with this idea of guarding against liquefaction. So let's close that out. And again, just a short clip, and it's going to be talking about all the sand, silt deposited, and I'll just play it here real quick.
This is an example of an apartment complex.
And again, this is Japan, earthquake 2011.
In Kamizu, Japan. All of this sand is a result of liquefaction, water and sand boiling up out of the ground as a result of the strong shaking.
So he just said it all boiled up as a result of the shaking, the seismic waves.
The amount of sand that we saw from this liquefaction is really, I mean, it's just incredible, and had a tremendous impact on these people in this apartment complex. This is a shot outside of that.
Now, the surface layer here, you're going to watch how it basically is almost like a quicksand.
That apartment complex, and you can just see how soft, right, how loose that sand is, even after the earthquake. Here, some of our team members are actually getting stuck in the sand, trying to pull out of it. As we pan around this area, you'll be able to see sand boils, or small, what we call sand volcanoes, all over the place. And these all are erupting out of the ground after the earthquake.
So all of these, the sand or silt, it all comes out of here, in addition to other cracks that are formed, but you'll see this a lot as well. I think this might be about it for this quake. Oh, yeah, sorry, let it roll a bit longer here.
This is just an example, again, of how loose that sand is that has been liquefied, and it really gives you a good idea how easy it is for some of these buildings to settle a great deal that are founded on this type of material.
Okay, so now, so all this sand and silt can be deposited. It comes out as a liquid above ground, and then it eventually solidifies. But you also have structures that can sink in their own footprint. And I want to go to here. they're going to show has it's sunk 3 feet.
Settled on the order of a meter to a meter and a half. And this movement is what caused these sections of the utility tunnels to displace relative to each other, leading to their flooding and all the sand going inside the tunnel.
So this building sunk 3
This is the
feet.
type of information we try to collect on these gear reconnaissance efforts. Here we are measuring the amount of settlement around these pile-supported buildings.
Okay, so interesting stuff. Interesting stuff. And I think what I wanted to point out as well, so that was an example of a building settling below ground level. I just found this person's a Twitter account. They took a picture. They're on a tour with this person from the United States Geological Service, and they're in San Francisco, and he's pointing out liquefaction features in San Francisco. So an official employee of the United States Geological Service, and in the next photo, so they're on their little tour, and he's pointing out, yeah, this is caused by liquefaction. This door that is probably wasn't even a door originally, but you know, you could see, I mean, I can't even imagine the steps that go down here, but they're on a tour and they're just pointing out liquefaction features. So the phenomena of, we always see buildings below ground level, right? And typically like 3/4 of the first floor is buried beneath ground level. Now he's admitting it on this tour that, yeah, this is the cause of a lot of these buildings. The one in Japan I just showed you, here's another one. And I think what I'd like to do now is just show you some pictures of vehicles. And let's take a look at the Christchurch event. Again, all this was brought above the surface, all this sand and silt. This poor guy's got to dig his vehicle out. This is just the quicksand effect of the roads. You have all these vehicles, it's just turning into a swampy mess. And you got your bus, look at this guy. Oh man. Look at these two people. But here it's turned into quicksand basically. I mean, look at this. Unreal. Just some more vehicles. Again, more vehicles. And there you have that vehicle. Yeah, so, you know, we always mention, why are the streets so muddy, right? When you look at older cities, and you'll notice that the streets are always in horrible condition. But this is Japan, and you could see all this, with all this soil that's being deposited, whether it's silt or sand. Got another picture. This was in Japan as well, and you could see, I mean, we've seen this in all the old major cities where you have this horrible, the streets are in horrible condition. And I think this goes some of the ways, this explains it in some way. And I just wanted to show you an old picture in Vicksburg, United States, 1909. And you've got these streets that are in horrible condition, full of silt or sand, and I believe, you know, where we experience an event like this liquefaction that potentially caused this. So another phenomena associated with liquefaction, of course, is buildings leaning. And so you've got this, and I think I got some more pictures of buildings leaning. This was in Nagata, Japan, 1964. It was a 7.5 magnitude. But you've got buildings that lean. They're all liquefaction events. And There's a couple of buildings leaning here, the number 3 on this building. And why I wanted to point out this particular aspect is because you know, I had a video where I talked about leaning towers in church machines, and at the time I didn't know what was causing, you know, was it an intentional lean, what was going on. But now that I've learned about liquefaction, this is in Germany, you know, this all makes more sense to me. This one is in Russia. So these leaning towers, I believe, experienced liquefaction. And if I close this out, this poor guy, you know, he's trapped in, he fell into a hole, but, you know, he's kind of stuck. And what this kind of reminded me is when you start looking into woolly mammoths, and I believe they found this guy buried in the earth, and in the permafrost, and they dug him out. If it's a he, I'm not sure actually, but what I wanted to point out here is what you typically see with these mammoths. Oh wow, look at that, snout intact. What you typically find is, I think I've highlighted it here, they suppose the mammoth fell into water or got bogged down in a swamp and could not, it's a she, could not free herself and died. So these woolly mammoths, they experienced a liquefaction event, and they just couldn't get out. And they probably travel in packs. That's why sometimes you see them, they'll be found in large numbers together. And if they all got stuck in the mud, so to speak, that would explain a lot. And then they kept sinking because of this quicksand type effect. So I think that's an interesting tie-in as well. And I guess the last point I wanted to touch on is a channel called Tiger Doug. He alerted me to a Bible verse talking about mountains melting, split apart like wax before the fire, like water rushing down a slope. So mountains melting like wax pouring down a hill. So you have this interesting, that talks about the hills and mountains melting like wax. And there's an interesting video I saw, and I'd just like to play it because I think it's an example of liquefaction that kind of ties into this a little bit. So here it is. This isn't a mudslide or a landslide. All these, this is just turning, it's all turning into, this is all becoming liquefied. Just melting like wax, basically.
Di drammatico. Madonna! È pazzesco! Incredibile!
I don't know if this is in France. That sounded like French, but, or it's in Italy. I think it was supposed to be in Italy, but not sure. But yeah, you could see just a liquefied river of earth.
Madonna Santissima!
I mean, it just keeps going. All the trees, just everything's kind of just melting, eh? So I will leave it there. So I just wanted to bring that up, and thanks to Tiger Doug for alerting me to this. So to summarize, you have liquefaction that you can argue that it's responsible for all the buildings that we see that are below ground level, the leaning buildings, the the roads that are just full of mud, and also deposits of sand and silt around buildings as well could be brought from below surface and engulf buildings. So I think this liquefaction ties in nicely to the mud flood. And these seismic waves, it's not just earthquakes that they're associated with. They're also associated with explosions. I think that liquefaction can explain the targeted, localized aspect to the mud flood because it's only in certain areas, seemingly. So I think they can be directed, they can be triggered, basically, is what I'm saying. So I guess I'll leave it here.